Hey guys, it's Gary with Fresh from the Farm Fungi. I'm here in my lab and I'm going to show you guys how I make culture slants for long-term storage. So I use these conical tubes, 50 mils by ProLab. You can get them for like $5. And then I like to use my potato dextrose auger. You could also use malt extract auger and some auger with antibiotics if you want, but I prefer the potato dextrose for the long-term storage. And slants are really nice because they don't take up much space and you can preserve your cultures for a very long time, and it's a one-time thing, and then you can pull from your slants as a mother culture to start your whole production process. So I'm going to show you guys how I prep these, and much love. All right, let's get started. All right, so the first thing you want to do is figure out how much auger you're going to need. I like to do about 30 mils per conical tube. You can probably get away with 20. I just store my cultures for about a year, so the more media, the more nutrients they have, and the more viable that those cultures are going to be. So I'm going to do about 750 mils of water. I like to use filtered tap water. You can also get distilled water if you want, but it works fine. You can even use tap water. So first thing, you're going to bring this to a boil. And while that's heating up, you can measure out your auger. So this is going to call for 4.5 teaspoons or 38 grams per 780 mils of water. So I'll probably do 35 grams. And I like to store my auger in this baggie with a desiccant, so that way it maintains its viability. I don't use PDA too often, only when I'm making my long-term storage slants. So it's good to have the desiccant with your auger, and that way it extends the life of that. So I'm going to go ahead and weigh this out and wait till this gets to a boil. Right. So I'm going to weigh out my 35 grams. A lot of people will add antibiotics at this stage, which I don't really recommend, because if you're going to be boiling it and sterilizing, those antibiotics are going to lose some of their efficiency. So if you're going to add antibiotics, I recommend doing it while the auger is cooling down, and you want to get laboratory grade antibiotics. It's a little bit messy, but so a little bit more. And the reason we're boiling this water is so that when we add the auger, it's going to dissolve easily. You don't want to continue the boil, so I can see the bubbles starting to surface, and I'm going to turn it off here and mix in my auger. You can even leave the water going a little bit, just so you can dissolve that auger easily. But basically, we're just dissolving this auger. It's going to take about 5 minutes, so I'm just going to stir this down. Alright, so this auger is finally all dissolved. So the next thing you want to do is transfer the dissolved auger into your sterilization vessel. I just use these half-pint mason jars. I like it because of the handling when I'm pouring this in the hood. So the key to filling these is you want to keep it about halfway filled, so that when it's sterilizing, it doesn't bubble over. And another trick that I use is I just flip the lid inside out and use that so it doesn't have a vacuum seal, which could cause the glass jars to crack, and then you get auger everywhere. So Another way to prevent that from happening is that when you put the lids on, you screw it tight and then you screw it loose a quarter turn. Alright, so I've got my auger. A trick I do to get a little bit of the last remnants is you pour it in there and kind of swish it around, and that way you're not wasting any auger. Alright, so I've got my jars here, and you're going to want to seal these up, and like I said, fully turn it and then a quarter turn less, so it's a little bit loose on there, but it makes it easy to grab out of the pressure cooker, and then while you're grabbing it you screw it shut, and then you have a good seal while you're working in the hood. Alright, so I'm just gonna load up these in the autoclave, the Presto pressure cooker. That requires about 1 liter of water, so I'm just gonna load up this water here. Probably should have done this while I was dissolving the auger. Alright, so alright. So I've got my water in the pressure cooker here with a little grate on the bottom so that the auger doesn't burn. And then I'm just gonna load these up. Now you can fit about 21 half-pint jars in one of these pressure cookers, but I'm only making slants today, so that's going to be enough for that. And then one thing to note when you're filling these, you always want to check the gasket, make sure there's no debris on there, no cracks. This one looks good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and start that, and once it gets up to 15 psi or 250 degrees Fahrenheit, you're gonna sterilize it for 20 minutes, and then once it gets down to about 5 psi, you want to move your whole pressure cooker inside the hood so that as the pressure is dropping, it's creating a vacuum effect, and once it hits 0, it's going to pull in air, but if it's in the hood, it's going to be completely sterilized, and you shouldn't have any contamination in your petri dishes or your slants in this case. So it's very important to let this cool off in front of a hood. I prefer the vertical hoods just because of my workflow, but even if you just set this in front of your horizontal laminar flow hood, you just want clean air. And then I could have probably cleaned off the lid a little bit better, but every time I put it in the hood, I usually spray it with alcohol too, just as a precaution while I'm carrying this downstairs. Any micros that get on there, they'll be sterilized. So, alright, I'm going to sterilize this 15 psi for 20 minutes. Alright, so the sterilizer just reached 15 psi, so I'm going to start the timer for 20 minutes. Alright, so while the media is being sterilized, I'm going to prep my laminar hood. The most important thing while you're making media is that you want your area to be completely sterile. So I use 15% bleach and isopropyl alcohol. 80% works fine. And what you want to do is spray the entire surface with bleach. Even your conical tubes here. And then you're going to want to let that dry. And you can even go a step further and get sterile paper towels. I just soak it in alcohol and it seems to work fine. But the bleach will take care of any proteins and DNA that could interfere with the growth. And then the ethanol is going to kill any living organisms by lysing the cells. So I could see that the bleach is starting to dry here. So I soaked my paper towel in alcohol. And then you always want to clean your surface from back to front and top to bottom. So I have a vertical laminar hood. So my clean air is coming in from the top, and this is the most sterile air. I prefer a vertical hood just because I stack my jars, and I find it easier to pull off the top than to reach over my pile and constantly work from back to front. So I could do another video about why I chose vertical hood. It's just preference. They're both the same. But in either circumstance, you want to prep your workstation. So now that the bleach is dried, I'm going to spray my isopropyl, or ethanol is preferable. It's a little bit healthier on your skin, but isopropyl works the same. So I'm going to start at the back of my hood and wipe it clean in a downward motion. And that's going to draw any particles from my hood down to the surface. And I'm going to wipe my container, set it over here in the corner. And now I'm going to work from my sides. So I'm going to go top to bottom on my sides. And now I can wipe from back to front. So you always want to go top, down, back to front. And then if you're using a horizontal laminar hood, you just want to wipe back to front. All right, so I'm going to spray this with one more coat of ethanol and go check on the sterilizer. It should be almost ready. All right, so the sterilizer has cooled down to about 5 psi, and I set it in the laminar hood. So I'm going to prep my utensils. The scissors I'm going to use to cut open the bag, so I'll just spray those with bleach and then let them dry for a couple minutes. And then one thing about pouring slants is you need some kind of utensil that you can sterilize easily that will help keep them slanted while they're cooling. That's why they call them a slant. So one thing I use is just extra lids, or another thing that works well is these metal straws. So I'm just going to wipe these down and let them sit in the hood while the jars are cooling down. All right, so the sterilizer is almost cool. A little trick I like to do to help it speed up at the last second is you can just hit it with some isopropyl, and that will evaporate the exterior and help it cool a little faster. So now that that is at 0 psi, we can take out these jars. I'll let the steam come out a little bit before I reach in there. It's going to be super hot, so I like to throw on extra pair of gloves. It's really critical that these are clean, and I devote this pair strictly for um, my work in the hood. So as I'm reaching in for the jars, I want to twist them closed so that I'm not getting any yeast from my skin into the media. Um, but you could see here it's, nice and translucent, no clumping. I'll just set that down over here. Alright, so I've got my sterilized scissors that I'm going to cut my slants open and carefully pull this out here. So it's always best practice to inspect, make sure that there's not any cracks or holes in your slants. So I'm just going to sterilize this workspace one more time, and then you can go ahead and start filling these. So I'll loosen the cap a little bit just so it's easy to grab with one hand, and then you kind of want to work quickly so that the auger doesn't completely cool. And essentially you're filling it up about 30 mils, and then you can either lean it on one of these straws or the edge, or these spare rings. I don't know if you can see that, but essentially you want to create a slant so you're increasing the surface area, which allows the mycelium to grow, and then you want to create a butt at the end of the slant where it will draw all of its nutrients. So I'm going to go ahead and do these. Another trick you can do is actually take the whole tray and tilt it at an angle. You just want to make sure that all the slants have the same amount of liquid in it so that they don't overflow or have too steep of a slant. But the straws work pretty well. I like to set up like a little bridge like that on top of these little caps, and then I can lay all my slants out like that. So I'll go ahead and do that. Alright, so I just got done filling my slants. A couple things I wanted to note is that if it's not exactly 30 or, some of mine were 25, some of mine were 35 milliliters, you just adjust the angle. So if there's too much media, then you want to tilt it, slant it a little bit more so it extends that surface area. And if there's less media, you can adjust your slant up so that there's more surface area. It's not essential that it's perfect. They also do make volumetric pipe headers that would speed up the process. This is just what works for me. So I can show you what I was talking about with the straws. You can see here all these slants. And another thing I wanted to note is that when you recap the volumetric tubes, you want to screw it on a little bit so that the condensation can evaporate. So while these are cooling, you can see the condensation forming inside the tube. It's not a huge deal, but ideally you want them dry. You can actually dry them with the caps off, which that works as well. It's just another step to screw them back on and a chance that contamination could happen. So I'd prefer to just screw it on a little bit, and then that will allow for that condensation to evaporate. But make sure you save the racks. Those are super nice to use. And then I also, save the packaging, and then I'll reseal it with my heat sealer. That way I have a sterile seal, and I can keep them in the fridge. Whenever I want to culture a new mushroom, I'll throw it on a couple slants, and they're good for, a year at least. As long as you're keeping them refrigerated, and you can add glycerol to the slant and freeze it in a cryo freezer, and then that is how you can preserve your strains indefinitely. So slants are a huge thing. I hope that this is a help. Slants are very important for preserving your genetics, which is one of my favorite parts about growing mushrooms is collecting all the different strains and preserving them for the future. So here's the slants, all racked up and ready. Since we do not use antibiotics with our auger, I usually let it sit in the hood for about 3 or 4 days to see if there's any contamination that pops up. If we're good, then I'll just package it up and keep them in the fridge. They're good for about 6 months, unused, and they could last. I've used them after a year before, and they're fine, but they start to dry out, so it's better to inoculate right away and then use parafilm on the edges. If you like our channel, follow us, and please subscribe if you're interested in watching more videos like this. I love sharing lab work and anything mycology related. So I appreciate you guys watching this. Thanks for the likes, and much love.